Good evening, everybody. Once again, thank you for coming tonight. I do believe that the audience online is really the important audience for tonight. So let's get going. Just a small introduction. For those who don't know who I am, I'm Eyal Cohen, community doctor over here in Crown Heights for the last 35 years. I will introduce our 4 panelists this evening. But first, a small introduction about this organization called Neshamos that people have started to hear about. Neshamos has one mission. It was started by myself together with a few other community members and some activists in the field. The mission of Neshamos is as follows. We have an obligation as a community to strengthen our children and our youth and hold them close so that they don't become disconnected. I've said before that the opposite of addiction is disconnection. And it's the fundamental disconnect that occurs. Disconnect of self, that means one to oneself. Disconnect one to one's spouse, one to one's family, one to one's immediate environment, whether that applies to young people in school or people after they leave school, the community in which they live, and ultimately a disconnect from Torah, the Rebbe, and God. It's that disconnect at whatever level it occurs and at all levels where that occurs that lead to so many tragic outcomes. It's those tragic outcomes we wish to avoid, and it's the mission of Neshamos to try at all levels and prevent that. I want to introduce our evening panelists, starting with the lady, Miriam Handelsman. Miriam Handelsman is a licensed social worker who specializes in working in all aspects of the substance abuse field. Miriam has dedicated her career to assisting young adults who struggle with addiction and mental illness, as well as providing support to their spouses and families. For the past 5 years, Miriam has served as clinical and program coordinator for the Living Room, a clubhouse program for Jewish young people in recovery. Miriam maintains a private practice in Brooklyn, New York. Second panelist is Alexander Rand. Miriam, you're a licensed social worker, correct? Miriam is a licensed social worker. Alexander Rand is also a licensed social worker, and he is an addiction therapist. He's worked with both inpatient and outpatient facilities at various yeshiva high schools in Brooklyn, and as an administrative supervisor for the Jewish Board of Family Services. I believe they call themselves now just Family Services. He currently maintains a practice in Brooklyn, New York, and serves as an adjunct professor at Brooklyn College and Torah College Graduate School of Social Work. It's an interesting thing. I'm a physician, so I represent the, shall I say, the professional class, and we will have a little bit of a discussion later. In the field of behavioral medicine, one has the professionals. Those are the psychologists, the psychiatrists, the social workers, and then there is this almost unique to the field of behavioral medicine, where we have people who are very much involved in spiritual and mental health guidance, and not necessarily do they have the letters after their name. Representing this group tonight of very much involved non-professionals, we have Rabbi Simon Jacobsen. Hey, Rabbi Jacobsen has served this community with heart and soul, involving himself in the lives of many, many people who have wandered into trouble. He has a lot of experience listening and advising. I'm sorry, Simon, I changed your bona fides over here. Rabbi Jacobsen actually doesn't need bona fides. He is heart and soul devoted to the mental and spiritual well-being of the youth of this community. Moshe Conant, our last panelist. Moshe is a sober alcoholic, an addict, for over 5 years. Today, Moshe is an internationally certified professional life coach. In his practice, he guides his clients straight to the root of their issue and helps them walk away feeling heard, empowered, and enabled to take steps needed to make changes in their life. Moshe is a good listener and has been through the mill, so to speak, so he understands the place of personal disconnect and reconnect and the power that comes with it. I'm going to now open the question part of the session. This is how we're going to operate. These are the rules of operation. I will pose the question to a panelist. The panelist is going to have about 2 minutes to answer. I'll try not to be rough. Then, subsequent to the answer, we're going to ask someone to comment on the answer so that we can just flesh it out a little bit and try and restrict the comments to being pretty short. There are 16, 17 questions, and then we would like to be able to open this meeting to the people, to the audience over here. But for the first part of this meeting, we're going to do it in a pretty structured form. I'm feeling very uncomfortable up here, guys. Question number 1 to Rabbi Jacobsen. As a teacher, once you're aware of physical, verbal, emotional abuse in the family. Sorry, these were questions that were sent in and chosen by us and the panelists as representative questions, but these are real questions sent by real people. This first question is sent by a teacher. Once you're aware of physical, verbal, emotional abuse in the family of a student, what steps can we take to stop the abuse? ACS was called and closed the case, and the abuse continues. Is there anything else that can be done? I made my higher-ups aware, probably the principals. The social worker has contacted OHEL, etc. Is there anything else that can be done so Yiddish Neshamos aren't tortured?
First of all, let me just thank you for honoring me to be on this panel. It's an honor to be with my distinguished co-panelists here, especially on such a matter that, as you just put it, is so critical, which is nothing more valuable and nothing more precious than our souls, the souls of our children, the souls of our communities. I want to just begin with this. There's no such thing as impossible. You just described a scenario, this question described a scenario where almost all the avenues have been exhausted. And you could think, okay, I did everything possible and that's it. That's not possible. It's not correct. Even if no one responds, not OHEL and not the faculty and not all the different lists, I don't remember all the people, but there's always something that can be done. The key is to find someone that cares. And it could be a friend, it could be even family members. Very often we have to remember the resistance to dealing with any issue like this, especially if it was already dismissed, is that close family members will deny it or minimize it. But there are people in the community, confidently, that you can speak to. And if anyone has this situation, I would strongly suggest you can contact myself, you can contact Dr. Rosen, you can contact maybe anyone on the panelists here. There's always someone to speak to who knows how to maneuver, who perhaps knows the ropes and knows how to cut through the red tape that in this case has failed our children. There's no such thing as a neshama that's lost. And precisely if no one else is there, we need to find someone that cares. And do not give up. If you're a family member and you see abuse, you cannot ignore it and not say, I've tried everything. I repeat that again and again because many people feel they have no one to turn to. So you need to know there are always someone to turn to. I'm not saying I'm the only person. I know that many people do come to me because they have everything else that hasn't worked. People are ignoring them or dismissing it. And there are others as well. So I offer right now, if anyone has a situation like that, feel free to call me confidently. And the same thing, I believe there are others as well. And I reiterate again, a soul that is at danger, especially from family members that are abusive, you're dealing here with generations. You're dealing here with not a small matter. This can be changed. This is a matter of life and death. And it's literally like seeing someone stabbing someone, and you cannot ignore that. And the fact that everyone else is ignoring it, that doesn't mean we are silenced. I think one big change that has happened in the last few years is the crying out. Some things that were once swept under the carpet are now being addressed. And that is only powerful because it tells you you're not alone and there's someone to talk to.
Thank you. Ms. Handelman.
Hi. So Rabbi just answered, I would say, most of what could be answered to this, but just to add a little bit in terms of how I see it. As far as a social worker, I think that I recently sat with an organization that deals with ACS, and they kind of explained the process and the system. And one of the things that I took away from it was that ACS does not close a case so simply. And like, if this teacher is still worried that there's something going on, this teacher has every right to go and call ACS back. Like, there's reporting to ACS, and that doesn't, thank you, that doesn't, reporting to ACS is anonymous. They can go and call again if they're very, very concerned. But that's only if they actually see real concerns that are not just their father screaming at them, but like bruises and serious neglect and, you know, the kids come sick all the time, not eating, not dressed properly, you know, not wearing a coat in the freezing cold, like things like that that are very, very concerning. They can call back ACS. That's one thing. And another thing that maybe they already did this, but just to kind of face it head on and meet with like all of the parties involved. I think that there's a lot to say about the whole team meeting with the parents and just really confronting them. And I guess, I don't know if this was already done, because it seems like a lot of things were already tried, but that is something that can often work when there's like a whole team of people together.
Thank you. I'm going to make a little plug here for Neshamos. We're trying to hire a social worker to do exactly that at this point, and that's to screen calls and to try and figure out exactly how to feed the calls and feed the problems to the appropriate professionals. That's a big job, and we're trying hard to put that in place. We're not yet ready for prime time. Question number 2. Mr. Conant. As a first responder or support person to people suffering and in pain, how does one have empathy, etc., especially when it's over and over again, and stay emotionally strong and healthy themselves? Some practical tips, please.
Yes. You can hear me. Can you hear me, right?
Go ahead, put it closer to you.
Okay.
Talk directly into it, because the people watching, they
Sure.
need to hear. They can't hear unless you're talking directly.
The most critical thing, I believe, that is needed in this type of work, talking about firsthand, being like type of the first responder, the first person that people call, is to have a good spiritual connection to Hashem, a sense of purpose, meaning, and the secondly is to have a support system. So a practical tip would be, if you find yourself being that person that people call, it's probably a good idea to do a little bit of research and see who are people I can call when I have questions. Whether it be, for me, I'll just say for myself, I have a rabbi, I have a mentor, I have a spiritual mentor, and I also have, let's say, a business mentor, where whenever I have these type of questions, I can send them to. I even have, as well as support groups, these are things that over the years, I'm very grateful to have, and used it all the time. Now, in addition to that, there's also the sense of purpose and the relationship with Hashem, and that is something that I use all the time. I even used it tonight. I know that things I'm going to say, I believe that things I'm going to say is going to affect certain people. So it's important for me to stay humble and ask Hashem that whatever words it is that people need to hear, that He speak through me. That gives me two things. Number one is it eliminates a lot of the fear of what am I going to do? Maybe I'm not worthy. Maybe I don't know the real answer. And then after the fact, a lot of the times I can find myself feeling guilty. Oh, maybe I should have said this. Maybe I should have said that. I could have done better. I could have done that. If I first put myself in the hands of Hashem, that allows me to do that. So now you're talking about how to stay empathetic, having that sense of purpose and knowing, one second, it was me that this person called. It must be that Hashem chose me to be the one to answer these questions or to be there for this person. So when I keep connecting to that, that allows me, that I see as a practical tip. That's something that I use all the time.
Ms. Handelsman, I'm going to steal your ability to comment. I'm sorry, and take it for myself. Yeah.
So I like this question because I really connected to it. When I just started out, I was scared that I was going to lose my sense of self and just kind of get lost in the pain that's out there and that's kind of within our population that I work in. One of the things that I always talk about with my supervisor is that idea of walking up the steps. We have steps until we get into the place. I'm as I walk up those steps, I bring God into it and I ask God to help me, just like what Moshe was saying. But also another thing that I remember is that God is taking care of this kid, this girl, boy. I'm like a helper, I'm a messenger, but really he's being taken care of. And another thing that I really just want to pitch out there is self-care. I think that it's taken for granted, but I can't give to others if I'm empty. I just can't. So that's really important. I mean, self-care could just be I need to take a break between two different people that I'm seeing. It could mean I need to go on vacation. It could mean I need to go get my nails done. It could mean I need to go to the gym. To be aware of your own needs is what's important, because if giving empties you out, then you don't have the energy. At least for me, I don't have the energy. I'm supposed to feel energized and happy to give to others, not empty and depleted at the end of the day.
I'm going to comment, having been in the saddle for 35 years, a few saddle sores, but I take my cue from the Rebbe. The Rebbe never said, I can't do this. I don't have the time for this, or whatever it is, not that I'm aware of. As far as I'm concerned, the cure for burnout is to dig deeper. Whenever one is feeling burned out of empathy, take it down a level. Get more involved with the client, with the patient, whatever it is. Put yourself into it deeper, dig deeper, and you'll find more treasure and more energy by doing that. Next question. Mr. Rand. Is there an alternative to medication like homeopathic, chiropractic, acupuncture, etc.? And if you believe there is an alternative to medication for mental issue, from whom will I be able to inquire?
So I'm also honored to be a part of the panel here. I want to take this microphone home. I'm going to put a panel in my house as well. My wife will submit questions. I'm not the doctor, but I'll answer the question, and then you'll probably just tell me everything that I said was probably a little bit off. But
Nope.
No, okay. He promises to be nice. So there's a number of separate fields here: homeopathy, chiropractor, acupuncture. I think each one needs to be looked at separately. There's definitely, some validity to alternative medicine. We see it; it helps some people. So, what is homeopathy? Homeopathy, for example, is they could be trained anywhere from being a doctor and then just studying more, natural interventions. And my understanding of homeopathy is that they're taking things that are normally somewhat toxic, they're putting them in very small doses into the person, or giving it to the person, and allows the body to fight it off and then to develop, more strength from it. There is use for it in mental health. I've tried homeopathy. I wanted to see what it was like. I like to try anything before I suggest it to my clients. I think it did nothing for me, but I don't know. What I would suggest, though, is that if you're going to someone who does practice, find out about their practice. How long have they been doing it for? What have their experiences been? Where have they seen success? Where have they not seen success? We also know that the placebo effect is very strong. So the belief that you're going to get better really helps. There's a study done where if you take, I think, more expensive, if you take name brand like Tylenol versus like Rite Aid brand, you feel better from your headache with the name brand stuff. It's the same ingredients. It's just what you believe. So we know that I think placebo is illegal at this point, I think, for doctors to give it without telling patients, but we know the placebo effect, it works very, very effectively. So sometimes when we believe that we're getting better, we get better. Just parenthetically, as a therapist, I was told as well that people that go to therapists that are more expensive tend to feel better. So I raised my rates and became a better therapist.
They suggested that I comment on this. When it comes to professionals, there are 3 requirements. These are Torah requirements: hasmada, smicha, shimush. If one is going to use any professional who hangs, whether it's a homeopath, whether it's an acupuncturist, the person needs to be appropriately trained. Hasmada, smicha, shimush. When it comes to the other group of people involved in mental health issues and behavioral issues, so now it's a little more difficult to find that because there is no formal training in smicha and shimush, the essential ingredients. So what are the ways to choose such alternative practitioners or people who are not subject to those requirements? A reference is extremely important. I ask people not to just go and see anyone without inquiring into their track record and doing the basic minimum research. To get back to the question, I think there are people that have very serious chemical mental illness. I think that for those people, medications are a necessary way to go. There always needs to be the behavioral component. The behavioral component must be added to all people with behavioral medicine or mental health issues. People who don't have serious chemical imbalances will do very well with therapy and appropriate cognitive therapy or whatever therapy is required. Can acupuncture, chiropractic, homeopathy, Chinese medicine add? Yes, they surely can, but then it must be by somebody appropriately licensed.
I want to add one point I forgot, that I was by a lecture by somebody from Colombia who's considered one of the leading people on alternative medication. And he mentioned that specifically for ADHD, a lot of parents come to him, they don't want to medicate their children. He said that for 80% of patients, he will tell the parents to give them a stimulant because it works so well in addressing the problem that the side effects and the worry about someone being on medication is much less than the detriment of a child failing at school.
Question, moving right along, question number 4. Rabbi Jacobsen. What is the best way to deal with narcissistic personality disorder? And how can you get someone help when they refuse to admit they have a problem?
You're giving me all the impossible challenges. Well, I'm going to speak about a practical, street-smart approach instead of a clinical one. You know, there are arguments out there about whether narcissism, someone diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, can even be cured. You know, there are those that are very radical and say, if you're married to a narcissist, forget about it. Either you're going to have to accept a miserable marriage, or you're going to have to get divorced. And they put it in those stark terms. And there are real professionals, and I've read a lot about this, and spoken to many experts who really believe that. They say it's just something precisely for the reason that you just said. You can't help someone who doesn't want help or is completely blinded and denies there's a problem. You know, I mean, you can't force anyone to do anything, especially this person may not be dangerous, so you can't just put them away and force medication or other types of interventions. So there are those that believe that. There are others that feel it could be treated. But of course, how could you treat someone who's not willing to go for treatment and never acknowledges the problem? You know, so you have that catch-22. So let me just share with you a few of my own experiences in this regard. It's actually one of the easier things to diagnose as a narcissist because they can't see that they're exposing themselves because that's how blinded they are. So just a few little tests that you could pretty much find out what a narcissist is like. You know, it's complicated because there are narcissists that are more extreme than others. There are those that know how to cover their tracks well. So I don't think we can go through a whole exhaustive narcissistic overview here. But I'll tell you what I've seen in my own experience and what I've heard from others in dealing with this. In Torah, there's a concept, sometimes you say, you go from l'shalei l'shma ba l'shma. You can get somebody motivated to do something for ulterior motives, and meanwhile, you're really getting them to address their issues. So one of the ways into a person who does not acknowledge there's a problem is try to find some type of sweetener or some type of bait, so to speak, lack of a better word. And I don't want to sound manipulative, but you have to sometimes find something that person has interest in, and they're willing to pay the price to get that what they want. And narcissists, frankly, have a lot of interests that are self-oriented. So if you can some way convince them and show them this is something that they want, you can begin to at least have them sit and address the issue. That often can work. It doesn't always work, let's be honest. There are some people, I don't believe we could ever write anybody off, but there's some people I can say I've thrown up my hands, I could not figure out what to do. But I have seen some individuals, sometimes because of their children, sometimes because they have other things they want in their marriage or in their lives, and essentially, you know, there's a price to pay, and you tell them that. If you want this, you're going to have to do A, B, C. And you don't have to necessarily define them as narcissists, because most people called narcissists who are narcissists will never, ever say, yeah, of course, I'm a narcissist. You know, it's not one of those things like AA. There's no NA. There's no Narcissist Anonymous out there. Like there's no Procrastination Anonymous, for obvious reasons, because they always show up too late, you know. So the same thing with narcissists. But you could find ulterior ways, and I've just dealt with a situation a few months ago. Somebody, the man was definitely, the husband and father was definitely a narcissist. You could see it in so many ways. He himself almost acknowledged it without calling it that. And the bottom line was it came down to, do you want this marriage to last? Do you want your children to have a relationship with you? And sometimes hitting rock bottom makes a difference. In this case, he was able to do some things behaviorally. I don't know if he could change it internally, but behaviorally, he has learned some mechanisms and some methods that have worked, and at least there's a functionality. I don't know if the marriage will thrive, but it's manageable. And you have to be realistic with the circumstances. So I would say the following: you have to knock on every door, and sometimes it goes in weird, surprising ways. You try this, you try that, you try that. With a person who's not willing to acknowledge, you just have to find, you don't go through the door, you go through the window, you go through the roof. Psychologically, there's always a way in. Everybody has their soft spot, and everybody has some opening. And you just keep knocking. If God blesses your efforts, you'll see some results. Sometimes you don't see it immediately, and sometimes, you know, you may not be the person. For myself, I often acknowledge, I may not be the guy, and that's that. And I say, you may have to find someone else. That's my overall response to that.
Thank you.
Love
Mr.
to hear what others have to say about this.
Mr. Rand, you got a chance. Mr. Rand.
For a non-professional, you hit on a lot of points.
I told you, he's been at it a long time.
Yeah.
Remember, professionals build the Titanic and amateurs build the Ark.
Okay, so in terms of first diagnosis, I think today we live in a day and age, in an era where we throw out diagnosis like just randomly. Somebody says, oh, I have mood swings, I'm bipolar, or difficult to deal with, you're borderline, or you're very neat, you're OCD. So I'm finding narcissism is now one of the new things. If we don't like somebody, we could just label them a narcissist if they've done something that we feel is a little bit selfish. There's real criteria, and I think some of the cases Rabbi Jacobsen was talking about, they're talking about actual people that really have, a personality disorder is basically a person's way of relating to everybody. The nature of all their relationships, you're going to see a pattern, and it is hardened in a person. And personality disorders are very difficult to treat. They don't typically respond to medication. And as Rabbi Jacobsen says, I'm going to repeat some of what he said, for a narcissist, they're not going into treatment on their own. They don't have a problem. Other people do. So one of the things that you can do is if you shift, like Rabbi Jacobsen said, if you shift in terms of what the goal is, we all have a weak point if someone comes to us for help. A child that acts out by misbehaving and making trouble and being disrespectful, we punish them. Even though the source might be the same as a child who acts out by being depressed, by doesn't do well in school, and is sad and asks for help. They both need help. But one comes to us in a way that we feel we can give, and one comes to us in a way where we feel they're being disrespectful. So for a narcissist, if you can give them a way to help, to say, let's say in a marriage, this woman needs you. Nobody else can make this person happy except for you. So you feed in a healthy way into the narcissism, that can sometimes help them shift as well as severe consequences. And you will find people that it is so rigid that it won't shift. We know that personality disorders are developed at a very, very young age. It's argued that even within the first few months of life, they can already see certain aspects of what will lead to a personality disorder. With a narcissist, we know that what they're actually suffering from is the exact opposite of the way they're displaying themselves. They have a completely shattered self-esteem and self-image. Deep down, they see themselves as completely worthless. The old theory was that they had very high self-esteem and they ran away with it. Today, they believe that it's actually a completely shattered person that is so afraid of looking at their flaws that all they can see is the good things that they do and project onto everyone else into the world how wonderful that they are.
Thank you. Ms. Handelsman.
May I just throw one more line? Just take where you left off. And therefore, one of the ways, which I would have mentioned as well, is that if you can help them actually recognize they have self-value, without telling them, you're a shattered personality and I'm going to show you how important you are, but if you can nurture that, it also works. I've seen that work as well, because they themselves don't even know how low self-esteem they have, because they've been hiding it from themselves as well. It's not like they know it and they just hide everyone else. So if you feed that, I've seen sometimes that can also have a positive effect.
Thank you. Ms. Handelsman, sometimes people open up to me. I'm not a therapist, just a human with a kind heart. Sometimes when they leave our conversation, they end up getting activated, and once one of my confidants ended up going to the hospital after we spoke. How can I help people with closure after they tell me their horrific experiences?
Okay, so just starting off with this question, it says, I'm a human with a kind heart. And I just wanted to say that I also feel like I'm a human with a kind heart. And I'm assuming that everyone who's here also feels like they're humans with kind hearts. Because as a human with a kind heart, we want to give to others, and I think that that's part of what Neshamos is about. And I guess where I'm trying to go with this is that being a human with a kind heart is a blessing, but it's also a big responsibility. People come to us, they want to share, they want to really talk and open up to us. But it's about being careful about how we allow them and how we direct them. So one of the things that I could say that I do is that there are times where someone will come to me when, we're about to close because we're open in the evening, and someone will come and we're like about to close and start wanting to really like spill out their whole trauma, or, even someone not in a like a private practice setting wanting to speak to me about something that's like really, really traumatic and really, really painful. And I very often and without any shame look at them and say, like, Rifki, what you're saying right now is so important and so holy and so special and so scary that I don't want it to be spilled out in a place that we can't close it. We don't know what to do with it right now. It's just too much. So then I would direct. I would say either let's find you the right therapist. You could speak to Neshamos. They could help you find the right therapist. Or even if they're not open to the idea of therapists, just say not now. Just try to like avoid that, spill. But if it does happen, because I do want to address the fact that sometimes it does happen, that someone will just like come to your Shabbos table and like the next thing you know, you're dealing with like a heaving, crying mess that you want to help and you didn't mean to, but then they're like, totally activated, like it said. So the two things practically that I've done and I've seen works is number one, to just orient them and say like, okay, what's your name? Where are we? It's Friday night. You're wearing this. We're right after this. You were planning on going to here, and like really just to like bring them back to the present. And then another thing is to contract. In other words, they should never leave your house or wherever you are with like no plan. Like they leave, the plan is they're gonna reach out to you later. They have this and this person's phone number that they're gonna call. Someone else knows it's happening. This is what they're gonna do. Sometimes we even write it down. That's the best. They're gonna make a phone call. They're gonna, listen to music, whatever it is that's gonna help them like bring it down and like take the anxiety away. But the main thing is, I would say, is number one, to try to not even go there in the first place, to be a kind heart that's like on the outskirts of that and then supporting them. And then the other thing, to really just know how to ground them and get them back to where they were.
Moshe.
The first thing I think about is that when it comes to these things, I'll actually find myself in the middle of a conversation with somebody. Forgive me, like whoever had this with me, but like at certain points, I'll just literally close my eyes for a second. Or I'll even be looking and listening, but I'll be begging God, please help me through this. Because this deserves respect. This is a person who's been holding something in, something dear, something that they've had, most likely had fears of what people would think of them if they shared it. And the only thing that I can compare it to, and therefore get a lesson from, is a Sefer Torah. This is a person, and just like a Sefer Torah, it's put in a shul, which is only used for holy things, behind a curtain, in a safe, with a mantle, and the belt, and everything, and it's only used at specific times, and it only comes out at holy times. And the first thing I think is important to acknowledge is the fact that there's no such thing as a problem too small, and there's no such thing as a problem too big. And if it's important to respect it, no matter what the size or what we think it is, and it's also important to value the hand that you offer in between. Because the way I see it is, like a professional, most of the time, they're meeting with you from the time that they meet with you from the start time of a session to the end time of the session. And it is critical, just as much, I believe, just as much as the professional, is to have somebody to hold your hand before and after the session. Somebody that you can call. And I've seen a study that people with one of the greatest causes of long life is having people that you can call and they will show up for you no matter what. So that's something that you can offer as a friend. I'm not a professional, but I'm here for you. I don't know what to say, but I'm here.
Good, thank you. This question is to you, Moshe. My question is, in your opinion, what is the appropriate level of openness about mental health issues the person should have in life in general and in shidduchim in particular? On one side, the stigma is very strong. On the other, revealing the truth will give the person more understanding and acceptance from society?
It's a great question. And I'm coming obviously not as a shadchan, and it wasn't, I'm just going to say my personal experience and my thoughts and what people who are in that situation have told me that they do. Okay? In my experience, I mean, just about a month ago, I opened myself up to thousands of people, and none of my fears came true. Zero. None of my fears came true. And I've only been accepted with respect and people asking for help and saying, hey, you know what, I think there's something that you said that I feel too. Or I think I see characteristics that you described in my child. What should I do? So there are the right times. There are the right times to share it. It's not always with everybody, just like the same thing as the Sefer Torah. We don't take it out all the time. The right time and the right place, we share it. And in regards to dating, just recently somebody told me he doesn't go out and say, like, put on a shidduch profile what his mental disability is, but he has a rule that once he sees that the relationship is getting serious, he'll mention it, and if it's something, especially if it's something that will have a significant effect on their marriage. There are some things that maybe it's better not to say, but I would recommend that those things seek. That's why it's good to have a mentor. You know, even anybody who's doing shidduch dating, it's good to have somebody that you can bounce off all your ideas. Hey, you know what? This is a little bit fine. I don't know what to do. It's good to have somebody to ask that question.
Mr. Rand.
You know, again, I think you really touched on a lot of the important points. So let's make a differentiation first between dating and just regular, people, friends, family members. When it comes to dating, I think there is a halachic aspect, and from what I understand in terms of what you must disclose, and I think there's three categories. There's what you must disclose, what you have an option if you want to, and what you should not disclose, because there are things that are damaging, and there are things that will not be helpful in a marriage. I think the general rule is that you're going to need to disclose, the same thing I think for medical issues, you're going to need to disclose something that's going to have an impact on the marriage. Something that has no relevance to the marriage, something that had happened prior. I'll give you an example. I had a young man I was working with, and when he was about 8 years old, there was some slight molestation. There was no long-term impact on it. He was functioning fine. There was no reason for that to be disclosed to his potential kala. So I advise people to speak to a Rav. I think after the third date is kind of the unofficial, official rule with it, but I think each person should speak separately to their own Rav and to get a psak about when they should say. Also, how you say is very important. So you can come out and say, like, I have a mental disorder and I'm messed up, or you can talk about it in a way where you're showing that you're recovering from it, what you're doing in order to take care of it, how you've been managing it. And I think we want to paint ourselves in the best light possible. In terms of with friends, I think it's a personal decision. Unfortunately, there are people that are highly judgmental still. We'd like to think that stigma is gone. It's not. And there are a lot of people, though, that are accepting. And there are a lot of people that if you open up to them, they will, there's no rule about sharing everything. I think in marriages comes up, like, people feel like this need to be completely honest. Like, you don't tell your spouse that, no, that doesn't look good on you. I mean, I learned that the hard way, but you don't need to do that. You don't need to come home and say, you know what? I realized that Monday I was slightly more interested in you than Wednesday. I just wanted to share that with you because I want to be open. So there are things that you want to open marriage. We know there's a relationship between emes and shalom in the Torah, that peace plays a role when it comes to the truth. And so we need to be smart in what we're sharing and with whom.
I'd like to ask you to add something.
Oh. You want to tell me what to add as well?
No.
Not that far. Okay, I understand. He's my doctor, so I have to. But no, I notoriously don't listen to him anyway, so it's for another time. We're always good at giving other people advice, right? I wanted to add something, a situation actually I've had was particularly with a bipolar situation. And bipolar, of course, is a life sentence, unfortunately. It doesn't go away. could be controlled with medication. But you know, if you announce you're bipolar, I don't know how many people want to date you, and families won't allow it. So I think what you said is actually very correct. There's halacha guidelines. It's going to affect the marriage, so there's no way you can keep it a secret. It's not appropriate. The question is, when do you say it? So that, yes, has to be monitored. But one particular situation which I really was very interesting and I think very important. In this case, it was the man that had the disorder, the issue, and he did share it after a few dates, the correct time, before there was already emotional entanglement and too much, and would be really inappropriate, but not at the beginning. But what he did was, at his own initiative, and I just thought it was brilliant, he said, you know, now I'm sharing this with you, and I want you to know everything. So I would be happy for you to visit my doctor. I'll give permission for him to speak to you, which adds an element of trust. So in other words, it's not like my version of it. I'm not minimizing. And actually, that was the key thing which she struggled with, and her family was trying to encourage her not to continue on. But she met the doctor, and that was ultimately the reason that she did marry him. A very happy marriage. There's challenges, but every marriage has its challenges. But I just thought that transparency that he allowed and basically brought her into the situation so she can make a completely full decision. Either I'm in this or I'm not. And she understood all the consequences because the doctor told her everything. The doctor was not his, he said, tell her exactly what's going on. Don't try to defend me. You're not my lawyer. I just thought that was something I wanted to throw into the pot here.
Thank you. Mr. Rand. When a bocher is sort of leaning to extreme thinking or to highly inspired crescendos, sounds hypomanic, right? Awkward behavior and the likes. Behavior that his peers notice out of the ordinary, variations of obsessive thinking, delusional thinking, or any other mental malady. What are the steps to be taken to help him land before he has a crash landing? How can he be presented with the facts that he's going overboard and have him acknowledge it? Who is to be contacted? If he does acknowledge that something went wrong and now he is in a better mental state, what are the guidelines he can use for himself to keep himself healthy? And how can he determine for himself when he needs to talk to someone or get help before it gets out of hand?
I forgot most of what you said, but I have it written down here, which is good.
It's the state of hypomania,
That's what it sounds like.
which is such a wonderful place to be. And how do you?
So we know with bipolar that there's two types of bipolar: bipolar 1, bipolar 2. The difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 is how severe the manic episode is, right? Bipolar means basically two opposites. So people that experience both one episode of depression and the opposite of depression, not stability and people being happy, but extreme happiness, so to speak, which comes with delusional thinking, a decreased need for sleep, increase in spending, and impulsive behaviors. That's what this sounds like. So I don't know if I want to tackle all the questions, because there's like a bunch of them. I don't know. Come to me. I'm going to charge for this. There's like 4 questions. Who sent this in? Okay. So I think
someone who was in a hyper state.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Okay, so let's go through some of the. I'm going to talk generally. It's very hard to answer very specifically to a question when you don't have a lot of the pertinent details in front of you. You know, I don't know who the person is, how old, what's going on, how long they saw it for. I think in general, like we've spoken about, you want to be of help to people. If you see something that concerns you, you go over with an open heart. You express to the person, this is what I'm seeing. I'm nervous for you. I want to be able to help. Is there anything that I can do? You offer help. Are they a minor? You might want to go to the parents. If they're an adult, you might have limited options. Are they at risk to themselves, to others, or are they just, you're concerned that they're just not functioning at the highest level? So all these things are need to be thought about before you talk to somebody. If he acknowledges that he's in a better mental state, what can he do to keep himself healthy? I think also we want to try to get professional opinions when you're dealing with things that might be not typical, just I'm in a bad mood because something bad happened to me, or I'm nervous about something coming up. When you see something that might be mental illness, you really want to help a person get a proper diagnosis, because the proper diagnosis is going to determine what the treatment should be. And without a proper diagnosis, sometimes people will get misdiagnosed with things, and for years they'll be spent treating something that they actually didn't need to be treated, and in fact was just a symptom of a different diagnosis. We know that like ADHD and trauma have a lot of similar symptoms, and sometimes people are diagnosed with ADHD and given a stimulant because they can't sit still, they have racing thoughts, all this type of stuff, and it's because they've been traumatized. Therefore they can't manage. One more point in terms of extreme thinking or people in yeshiva that seem to be more obsessive. I think, unfortunately, that Yiddishkeit is a place where obsessions, can grab onto. Because we do believe in, the idea that we don't have limits. We can, with Hashem's help, we can do anything we put our minds to. And there's truth to that. There's validity to that. But there's also a risk in that. There's a risk in that being misused. People that have inability to say no when somebody asks them for a favor because it's chesed. Not if you're burning yourself out and you're resentful afterwards. That's not chesed. I tell my clients, if you don't have the ability to say no, then your yes isn't a yes. You have to be capable of saying to somebody, I'm not going to do it. Then you can choose to say yes, then it's chesed. So when it comes to extreme behavior, we see sometimes, unfortunately, that people grab onto Yiddishkeit as a way of expressing their obsessive behavior, as a way of trying to become perfect, and it's just a symptom of what their disorder they're struggling from.
Rabbi Jacobsen.
Well, I'll share an actual event that happened my own when I was in yeshiva, and there was a classmate of mine that was going through a hyper state. And I wasn't trained really or understood it all, but today I understand it in retrospect that if it's someone in the ages, and this is just a rough number, 16 to 24 or something like that, it could be the onset of bipolar for the first time. So you have to be really aware of that. On the other hand, you don't want to create an alarm that's not necessary. So it's important to know that when you see such symptoms, someone coming and staying up late and being very hyper or believe they can do anything, and it looks visually like someone very optimistic and very driven, but when you see it's going to the point where they're not eating or they're doing anything extreme, and it's in that age you have to really talk to a professional because you need to know what to do, because intervention early on can be literally a lifesaver, because a person like that can have a big crash. And again, it has to be done wisely, because we also don't want to just alarm. Some people do go through a moment like that, and it's not necessarily a sign of a disorder, onset of a disorder. In that situation where we were in yeshiva, we realized one was a bocher in our yeshiva in the dorm, and we saw that he wasn't sleeping, and he was pacing, and and he was having these grandiose dreams and stuff like that. So thank God, some of us were sensitive enough to send him home. Basically, we convinced him to go home, because at least he'll have his family and so on, that there's a place of a little safety instead of out here in a dorm where, and it ended up being he did get there, but he did ultimately, it was bipolar. But it was controlled because they were immediately professionals brought into the picture. I would also add something. There's actually a spiritual concept which is called in Hasidic language is a rotzei shuv dimension. Rotzei means a strong yearning and longing. It's almost like a hyper state. But then there's the critical need for the shuv, which is resolving it. What we would call tension and resolution. So you look at a cardiogram, a healthy cardiogram is waves. There's ups and downs. But if the peaks are too high and the valleys are too deep, that's when you're getting into an unstable situation. So often, even in spiritual ecstasy, there's the concept of people who literally expire, and it's really not healthy. Even when we read about Nadav and Avihu in the Torah, they literally burned out of a spiritually high experience. Now, I'm not necessarily applying that to all of us in that particular level, but in every given situation where there's a high, you have to find a counter low, so to speak. Like maybe if you see a friend like that going in that state, take him out and go to have a good dinner. Ground him, get him away from the fantasy land, and let's just do something that's light or fun or sports or exercise, run. Physical stuff can be a very good releaser of such tension. I mean, it's important to counter. If you see a high, you got to have something that balances it out. And of course, professional guidance is always necessary, because we're lay people, we don't always know what's happening, but without extra alarm than necessary.
I'd like to add a comment.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Mental illness is a spectrum. So from the normal state, appropriate rotza v'shuv, to the hypomanic state, where the individual is still functioning fully in society, has not had a break with reality. The hypomanic state is incredibly empowering, and people feel wonderful in that state of hypomania, which is frequently why patients with bipolar disorder stop taking their medication, because they yearn for that hypomanic state where they are empowered. But that hypomanic state fairly frequently leads into full mania. And full mania is psychosis, where there is a break with reality, and modern psychiatric theory would suggest that that state of psychosis is damaging to the brain, and there may never be a complete and full recovery. It's possible after psychosis. There is always some reshima left from the psychotic state. So it's critically important to identify people who are on that spectrum where their behavior starts to change radically, and reach out for help at that point.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a comment, primarily because it's very controversial. And I think every panel needs some controversy, right? Okay, it's a good thing I'm not from the community, I don't have to worry so much. I'm married, my kids are too young for shidduchim anyway. So this is related, but not maybe directly, which is that...
Time flies.
Time does fly. I'm sorry, Ita, I know you're 12, but you have a few more years. She's my oldest. So I just want to mention that Judaism is not a cure for mental illness. And davening better and learning better and getting more connected, which sometimes we see somebody that's sad and depressed, and we feel like if they would just connect themselves more. Now, certainly we all yearn for a connection with Hashem, and that's a part of every Jew, we believe. But people have to be stable, and then Yiddishkeit will deepen a person's experience in life. But stability comes before that. It's not that davening cannot and should not be the thing that gives you stability, right? Mental illness is not going to get cured in yeshiva with a Gemara, unfortunately. Now, I know some people might disagree here, and that's okay. We will agree to disagree. But mental illness cannot be addressed just through, I know that, I want to make a caveat here, because I know that there were certain mamarim that were told to me from the Rebbe, and I know that there were certain people that he met with that he actually was able to, because he understood people so well that he didn't need training, but he got to the bottom of what a person was suffering from. I think there was one person who was in therapy for like 25 years, and he just told her, like, stop already, like, you gotta cut this out. She was so lost in therapy. But we can't always turn to a spiritual answer for things that need a doctor or a therapist.
Thank you.
Can we agree to agree? Or
No, we need controversy.
Ms. Handelsman, there's lots of talk about what to do if one's friend or relative is an addict. What can be done to prevent somebody, self or another, from the first recreational drug use before someone becomes an addict? Why does someone try it? Why does someone need it? How can we help to prevent that as an option? Tough question.
Well, there's a lot of questions in one. But I would start with, when I read it, I was like, whoa, there's like one question, another question within the same question. And it kind of reminded me of how sometimes when I see a problem, I want to like do, and like fix, and like kind of focus on like what I can do about it, and not like even just acknowledge the fact that having someone that I love or that I care about or that I know that is already thinking of using or is already starting to use, that's really scary. So I guess first and foremost, and something that we've already been talking about on the panel, is just connect to that feeling and connect to Hashem about it, and to your fear in it. But then when it comes to actual prevention, I actually asked one of our members, and I think she's watching, so it's fun, what she thinks would have prevented, where she ended up. And she said she thinks the answer to prevention is love and acceptance. So a big part of it, when we continued to talk, was about, if she was only accepted, well, I don't want to talk about her, but like if people or if we all were all accepted and really looked at internally and not just given those expectations, we might not have, or people would not have to turn to things that take them out of themselves. There's pain and there's suffering and there's fears and there's so much that could be addressed before like outside, substances that, take them out of themselves. They may not have needed that to take them out. So that's one part of it. But another part of it, if you want to just go with the practical piece of it, but if it's only this practical part about what I'm going to say, like the education and stuff, then it doesn't really work. Meaning, if you accept and you love people and you also educate them, then you have a chance. The second piece is education. Just explaining two, I would say, most important things are which substances are what and the dangers of each of them. I think a lot of teenagers and even adults don't even know the difference between different substances. And I think just basic education, and I'm sure Neshamos can give you some direction about how to get that information. And also, something also really important is that people really need to understand that this whole idea that I'll try it once and I'll experiment and I won't end up like them is just so false. And the spectrum of experimentation to using and abusing and then dependency is could take a long time, but it could also take a couple of days, weeks, and then they're signing themselves up to death. So yeah.
Moshe?
It was right before the first time. It was right about the first time. It was right before the first time, and it was actually many times before the first time I'd ever used anything other than alcohol. And I was given a warning. Moshe, don't try it. Because if you try it, you're going to like it. And you're not going to be able to stop. That kept me going for a while, but then at a certain point I was like, it's worth it. I believe God created, and this is, again, my personal, non-professional opinion based on experience. Drugs are a good thing in the right place for the right person with the right symptoms by a professional, monitored and taken as prescribed. Then drugs could be a good thing. I believe God created it for specific reasons. Now, the way I use drugs and alcohol after a certain point was in a form of self-medicating. I believe I needed it in order to function as a human being, as a regular member in society. So these were my beliefs, and that's why I did it. And I'm talking about getting high in the morning right before I go to work, and I function as a financial director of a corporation. And I needed that in order to function. So it's important to see how the addict sees it. I'm not speaking for everybody, I'm just saying in my experience. And if somebody wants to see whether it's a risk or not, I know many people, tens of people that were in my life that they've tried smoking weed a couple times, once a year, twice a year, over a small short period of time, and they dropped it and they're just fine and they never think about it. And then there are others that don't. So what's the sign? How do you know the difference between the two? It usually goes into, and I highly encourage people who have these questions to look up online, or maybe Neshamos can provide it, is that why are they using in the first place? What is the hole that they're trying to fill? And most of the time, I think there's a book by Abraham Tversky, it's addictive thinking. It's the way we think and the way we see the world. It's a disease of perception. Everybody else sees the world in one way, but we see it in another. And because we see it in another way, we need drugs in order to function. So what I recommend to this person is to understand where the addict is coming from, and also look into what the description of an addict is, taking out the whole concept of the drug. What is the person as a person, and what are their issues, and why are they doing it? And I completely agree with that concept of love and acceptance. If somebody asked me, what would have changed it? I don't know what would have changed it. I don't. I know my life would definitely be better if I had, let's say, more love, more acceptance, more, But there was a certain point where I had to accept, like, this is who I am, you know? And based on, if I don't accept myself for who I am, then I'm just going to be, like the narcissist, I'm going to be avoiding getting the help that I need. So for this person who's asking the question, I would suggest looking into how does an addict think, in addition to the thinking, there's also like a super high level of sensitivity. Emotional sensitivity. And we also have it as part of the Neshamos, is there's like a training to be able to detect people who, it's not for the public yet, but it's
Right.
being used in schools, which...
Rabbi Jacobsen, I'm going to give you the mic to answer in one second, because I see you have something to say. I'd like to add something here also. Teenagers will experiment. They have experimented for centuries and they will continue to experiment. I believe that what we need to do is strengthen the teens, the young people, pull them tight, connect them. And so therefore, even if they do experiment, they will feel their connection in a way that will hopefully protect them. Rabbi Jacobsen.
I wanted to share, Moshe said, triggered a memory of mine that I was once invited to speak to a group of teens at risk. Well, actually, they were beyond risk already, and they were already in rehab. The teens that had gotten in trouble with drugs and alcohol. And it was an informal session with around 20 boys and girls. And I just posed a question just to begin the discussion. Like, nobody sets out to become an addict. No one says, hey, I want to become an addict. How am I going to do it? It doesn't work that way. And then by the time you get into trouble, you're already like after the effects. So I said, how'd you get to this place? And I just wanted to hear what they said. So I remember one said, well, my parents were going through an ugly divorce. I was so painful, I was just looking for anything to numb myself. Another said I had bad friends, and they said, others it was recreational. And then there was one person that said something, which is actually what I was looking for. They said, I was simply bored. I'm a very creative person, a lot of energy, and I had nowhere to release the energy. And this seemed like, I got the high, I felt great, and then I became addicted to feeling great. And we went around the room, and I said, so how do you explain the fact some people go through difficult lives and they don't become addicted, and some do? Everybody wants to numb themselves from pain. And boredom became an interesting word because it's seemingly so innocuous. So you're bored. Everybody's bored at times. But boredom is a vacuum, a real vacuum. And vacuums, and nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the human psyche. When there's a vacuum, rest assured, something's going to crawl in there. And it's usually going to be unwanted bacteria. We'll call it psychological bacteria. So if you see someone that's at that state, either they're very energetic and have a lot of energy, very creative, and they are bored, and they're beginning to experiment with something, if you're a friend of theirs, I would recommend try to find something that excites them. Now, some people, for example, are very musical. Get involved in some music band. Some like sports. Because the more you can feed the energy and have an outlet for it, the weaker will be the void, and the less need for finding something that's unhealthy. It's like a thirsty person. Give them water, they won't need to drink toxic substances. Now, it's not automatic, it's not a magic trick. I just wanted to throw that out as another element in the early stages of where someone may go one direction or another.
I'm the only one that didn't comment, so I just want to say hi. That's all.
Hi. I'd like to throw out, and something that we've been thinking about is, how do we train the much younger kids in the 5th, 6th, and 7th grades in terms of resilience training, that they will be resilient once they are exposed. How do we formally introduce that into the education of our children, or as parents, how do we give our children resilience? But for another time. Mr. Rand, what constitutes an unhealthy mental state? And how does that clinically and practically differ from a regular mental health state?
So I think we're asking the difference between something that's actually a diagnosis versus something that's just maybe symptomatic, some symptoms. We all get depressed. Not all of us have depression. We all get anxious. Not all of us have an anxiety disorder. And I think if you look at every disorder in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, where they diagnose things, We all have symptoms of a lot. Well, okay, I'll speak for myself. I have a lot of symptoms in there, but the main criteria under every disorder, what it says, it causes significant impairment in your functioning. So depression is depression. It's clinical depression when it's stopping you from taking care of your major responsibilities in life. It's impacting your relationship. For children, it's relationships in school. For adults, it's relationships and work, or whatever it is that they're doing, spending most of their time. So that's kind of the line of demarcation is this impacting your ability to function?
Thank you. Rabbi Jacobsen.
I'm commenting on Miriam.
You can comment on what constitutes an unhealthy mental state?
Some say we're all in that state.
Right.
Especially Jews. I mean, I'll translate it not in a clinical or a professional. I'll do the amateur version, the one learned from hard-earned experience. It's a very great question in general, and even from a Torah point of view, what is healthy? What's not healthy? You know, I, by the way, totally agreed with what you said earlier. To escape toward religion can also be an addiction. There are many religious addicts too. It doesn't sound like an addiction, but it could be one, because it's a crutch that takes you away from personal responsibilities. There's an expression, Tara mevi l'dei kedusha. Purity brings you to sanctity. I think in a broad sense you could translate purity as being healthy. Health brings you to sanctity. Sanctity does not always bring you to health. In other words, to put it on some controversy, I'll throw something in. A religious person that's dysfunctional is usually worse than a non-religious person that's dysfunctional, because religion becomes part of the dysfunctionality and God's in the picture. I met a guy once in shul, and he would come to me for advice, and he's a strange time, like 10 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night. I see him in Ma'ariv, and then he's sitting down to learn Shiurim, and I know he has issues at home. So I say, what are you doing here? This is the time your children are going to sleep. He says, I was advised by my mashpia that I should get away from home when the children are going to sleep, so I shouldn't get into a fight with my wife. So he's coming to shul to sit and daven and learn in the most important time, which is bonding with your family. To me, this was like ultra unhealthy. With all good intentions, completely distortion. Instead of helping him engage and figure out how to be home in a nice way, sending him off to go daven and learn, ridiculous. Healthy is, from a Torah point of view, is simply a person who is balanced. Balanced, not extremes. And balance is the most important thing. The Rambam Maimonides writes, the middle path. Not extreme right, not extreme left. Not politically, not religiously. Torah always said, don't add more, don't be more religious than God, and don't be less religious. There's a prohibition, just like you should add a mitzvah, do not subtract a mitzvah. So someone can say, what's the big thing? I'll add a mitzvah. No. Don't become a partner with God. Because one day you add, and tomorrow you decide, you know what, I'll subtract. So healthy is balance. And there are no extremes, not in the context of religion, not in the context of marriage in any certain place. And when you have that balance, generally speaking, that will bring to all other good things. So I would define the unhealthy person as the one that's unbalanced in some fashion or form. And slowly, and that, of course, is a wide spectrum of that. There's real extreme imbalances, and our whether it's our rabbis or our mentors or our therapists or our doctors, they are there to be objective and help us find the balanced place. And if you see something a little too extreme, you want to make sure you get back in the middle road.
Sometimes we're unbalanced, by the way.
Huh?
Just saying. Sometimes therapists are unbalanced. Nobody here.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes, yeah.
We need to speed it up a little bit, guys. Moshe Conant. There are so many opinions about mind-altering substances and how to get off of them. How do we know who to listen to? What constitutes an experienced mental health professional, and how does that correspond to this panel's members? Someone may be smart or a doctor or learned, but is it appropriate to take advice from such people in this conversation?
I think, there's two things I believe that a person needs when they are seeking help. Number one is somebody with mind, and then somebody with heart. Somebody with mind, that means somebody who's a professional, who understands the technical part and has the technical solution. In addition to that, I highly recommend that as soon as somebody is looking for help, they should also try to find somebody, whether it's a friend, a family member, or somebody who knows somebody that has gone through what you've gone through. So those two elements, I believe, are critical. Hearing from somebody that I've gone through what you're going through, and this is what I did, and I'll be here for you through your fears, your regrets, and your indecisions, and your, the lack of clarity and the unknown. Somebody there for you, that I think that is critical. And also, when it comes to professionals, it is important to seek a professional that is that has expertise in the area that you're searching. So, number one is, what is my issue? Finding a diagnosis. And then once I have a diagnosis from somebody that I have a reference, like you mentioned, having a reference, somebody that you trust, getting a diagnosis. And once you have a diagnosis, go to somebody who's a professional at that field, who specializes at that field. I think it's just another thing it's good to know. If you're going to a professional and that person diagnoses you with 5, 7 disorders, chances are, in my non-professional experience, and what I've seen is that it's usually one thing that is causing all of them, and everything else is just on the surface, and there's something that's causing all of them. So if you get 5 diagnoses, where somebody says you're OCD, you're bipolar, and you're an addict, and you're schizophrenia, and you're depressive, and you're anxious, chances are there's something deeper behind all of it.
In medicine, we call that the unifying hypothesis, and it's invariably the correct path to take. I'm going to ask your question, and then you can come back and add anything that you have to this. We would, as the person wrote in, define addiction. Is that different from an unhealthy addiction? I'm not quite sure what he or she means by that. I would think that all addiction is unhealthy. Aren't we all addicted to pleasure? That's what you meant. Aren't we all addicted to pleasure? And if so, it's just which pleasure we are addicted to that differs. Is it true to say that an opiate addict is someone addicted to saying Tillim, and someone addicted to saying Tillim are in similar mental states? So, yours.
So going back to the first question, in terms of like the 5 diagnosis, we do that sometimes when business is slow, because this maintains a long-term client. You can't leave if they have 5 diagnoses. It's years of therapy. But on a serious note, you want to find somebody that is licensed and experienced, and in my opinion, that is in continuous supervision and training. Now, you're a consumer, right? You're paying for something. You have the right to ask questions, right? Even questions that are hard sometimes, like, how many years have you been, and I get this on the phone sometimes, how many years have you been doing this? Can you tell me like what your success rate is? Can you tell me, where'd you go to school? Do you train? Who's your supervisor? If it's asked in a respectful way, you're a consumer. You have the right to ask. I'm not here, and I tell this to clients sometimes, I'm not here to make friends with clients. I have to have a social life outside of my practice. I learned that the hard way. Now on a serious note, on a not so serious note, the biggest compliment I got, I remember I was working with a teenager from one of the more modern high schools in Brooklyn, and he brought his friend into a session, and then at the end of the session, they asked me if I want to go clubbing with them. I said, you don't even know what you just did to me. I said, first of all, I can't dance, and people are gonna run away if I come with you, and I can't go. But my self-esteem is doing much better. I said, no, unfortunately, we're not here to make friends. We're here to help, provide a service. So you're a consumer, you're spending money, you have the right to ask questions, and you have the right to decide, I don't like this doesn't make sense to me, and I want to choose something else. So that's in terms of the first question. In terms of addiction, let's discuss criteria. There used to be 2 different diagnoses for addiction. There was one called a substance abuse disorder, and there was something that was called substance dependence. The word addiction is not a clinical word. Substance abuse disorder meant that you were using a drug alcohol, and it was impacting your functioning in one of 5 areas, in not necessarily a significant way, but you had a legal issue as a result of it, and you continue to use. You have a school problem as a result, you continue to use. The more serious diagnosis is substance dependence. And substance dependence means that there's tolerance, you need more of the same thing to get the desired result. Withdrawal, when you stop doing the behavior or taking the substance, you have a physiological body reaction to it, which doesn't mean that the behavior, the substance needs to be addictive in and of itself. People say that marijuana is not addictive. Now, it's not physically addictive, but it's psychologically addictive. And once something is psychologically addictive, it is now physically addictive as well, because our brains work together. The psychology and all the other, the doctor will explain a lot better than I can, but there's a physiological response when I do a behavior and I put a substance into my body. And then the other thing that kids like to say is that, no, Hashem made it. It grows in the ground. It must be good for you. To which I tell them, and so are 4,000 plants in South Africa that will kill you. Hashem made them all as well. So we know that something just coming from the ground and something being natural is not necessarily going to be something that's good for us. The other criteria that I didn't mention is a preoccupation with, they spend most of their day thinking about the substance or the behavior, and repeated attempts to stop that are unsuccessful. So that's the more serious diagnosis. Today, there's only one disorder. It's called a substance use disorder, and then you just categorize if it's mild, moderate, or severe, and the criteria are the same criteria that I just mentioned. In terms of aren't we all addicted, so to an extent, there's truth to it, but when we're talking about an addiction, we're talking about something that you're doing despite consequences, and you can't stop. So yes, if you say Tehillim for 20 hours a day and a result that you don't eat, and you neglect your family members, and you're addicted to Tehillim, and no, I don't know if that's much better than being addicted to a drug, because chances are, whatever you're doing with Tehillim, it's probably not connecting to God. So, is it true to say an opiate addict and someone addicted to saying Tehillim are in similar mental states? Yes, we're all seeking pleasure, and we all want to feel good. I think there's a question from, I'm not going to get rabbinic here, there's a rabbi here. There's a question from, I think, the Mechtav Meliel about what's the difference between a tzaddik and a rasha? A tzaddik wants pleasure in the next world, a rasha wants pleasure in this world. Tzaddik's just a little bit smarter. So yes, to an extent, we're all seeking pleasure, but what are we willing to sacrifice in that pursuit?
I just want to add things with addiction. I agree with what you said, but I think one more point I would make is the following. Yes, we all are capable of being addicted, and some people are addicted to money, some people are addicted to power and influence, and may not have the criteria that you described that you would need to go to a doctor for that. But this is where you have the concept where I think Judaism is really the true emancipation. And I say this all the time, even to people who are not physically addicted to some substance or behavior, and that is the expression that when the Jews left Egypt, they became free. What does it mean they became free? They didn't just become free from Egyptian bondage, they became free spiritually and psychologically. And like the beautiful words the Torah puts it, Avodai atem v'lo avodim la'avodim. You are my servants and not servants to my servants. The only true freedom is the way the Mishnah says, Ein lecha ben chayrin ela misha isik b'Torah. It doesn't say that someone studies Torah is free, but you cannot be free unless you connect to something transcendent that's greater than you. Because at the end of the day, you will then be addicted to yourself and to your needs. It could be pleasure. It could take on a shape that has absolutely no type of medical definition of addiction, but you're addicted to your ego and to yourself and self-worship and indulgence. And ultimately, true worship of God means that you're addicted, you're connected to something that's greater than yourself, and that can't be defined as addiction because it's not about you. And that greater than yourself defines you. If people had that, they would not be addicted to anything.
Can I just...
Yes, go ahead.
Hi. So just this panel is going to end, but this conversation about addiction and Judaism and what's going on now is, if anyone has the time and enjoys reading, there's an amazing book that was written by Menachem Poznansky and Aryeh Buxbayev. It's called Stepping Out of the Abyss, and in it there's a chapter written by Dr. Twersky, and it literally explains all of what was just said and more with stories that can really be very accessible. It's specifically written for family members and educators and teachers. Obviously, people that are suffering also would benefit, but it's really a very, very good book, and yeah.
Thank you. You get the next question. If somebody is mentally unhealthy, is it not true that they will always need connection to a mental health professional? Unlike, say, an infection, that after taking penicillin for your strep, you're better? And if so, is it not important to make clear the life that they will have to live?
Okay, so first to just answer the actual person that's asking the question, it sounds like, maybe I'm reading into it too much because I'm a therapist, but it sounds like they're frustrated with their family member that's not listening to them and not going to therapy, and why can't they get it through their head that they need to go to therapy because they have this mental illness. So to answer that person, you might not be able to do anything about your very, very beloved family member. If they don't want to go to therapy, they probably won't. I know that's a horrible answer, but that's just, I think that's important for us all to realize where we stand in this world. We are not God. We cannot make people do things that they don't want to do. Obviously, there are different things that you can do to help them hit a rock bottom so that they want to get the help, and that's like a whole different conversation. But as far as what the difference is between someone that needs to go to therapy or seek mental health professionals throughout their life and someone who just kind of needs it once and it's just like a strep throat, we would just say that someone, let's say, is kind of cruising along life and doing okay and then has a bump in the road, like, you know, they have a broken engagement or something like that. They need some help. They need some tools. They go to therapy. They learn the tools that they need in order to get through life. Maybe they need to go back in a year when something else happens. Maybe they don't. They processed it and they're good. And then there's like a whole nother, you know, world and, you know, what we all have been talking about tonight, but that is real mental illness and real depression, and I would say, not depression, real mental illness and addiction. And I would say that it is more similar to like a diabetes, where you can't just afford to not go be monitored. Like that's just, it's like a death wish. Like you have to be monitored. So the same way that someone that is with a real mental illness and addiction has to be somewhat plugged in, they can't just afford. And, you know, another piece that I would say with addiction specifically is that it's not always the case that they always need to be going to therapy, because we talk about what AA is and you know, Alcoholics Anonymous. The idea is that they're getting help from their fellow member that has been through the same thing. So it could be that initially they'll need, you know, like a whole intervention of people, a doctor, a psychiatrist, a therapist, a rehab and all of that. But after some time, they do still need to be plugged in, but it doesn't have to be on the professional scene.
Rabbi Jacobsen.
Repeat the question.
Question is, if somebody is mentally unhealthy, is it not true that they will always need connection to a mental health professional? And if so, is it not important to make clear to them the life that they will have to live?
Well, I would concur with everything you've said. I don't really have much to add. I do think you know, medical health professional is a very broad word. I think all of us need to have, I think it's an upcoming question, we all need to have an objective person in our lives, because we have blind spots and we're all subjective. It could be called a rabbi, it could be called a mentor, it could be a teacher, it could be a friend, it could be a professional. So I think in the broad sense, everybody needs someone that has an actual issue. Of course, will need a more professional, not just a friend, but someone who's trained. And I don't think there's nothing to be ashamed of. It's the way the human condition is, that we all need each other in that sense. That's my...
Rabbi Jacobsen, you stay with the conch. When the Rebbe tells us to get a mashpia, could you say he's hinting to us to get a therapist?
I thought that I would reverse the question. When we say to get a therapist, is there a hint to get a mashpia? Let me answer that question, I mean, roundabout way, but answering. It's something that actually happened recently with myself. I have a program every Sunday night called My Life Chassidus Applied. Some of you may be familiar, where I answer questions and present different ideas from Hasidic thought, applying it to real life situations. So one week I was speaking about the idea of the mashpia, and a very interesting thing that happened following up to that. In 1976, the end of 1976, Yutas Kislev it was, a Farbrengen, that the Lubavitch Rebbe held, and he spoke then at length the importance of instituting or reinstituting the concept of mashpiyim. Mashpia, just for the record, means simply someone that transmits, but it's really a mentor. It's a mentor. So it's a very broad word, and it can mean many different things. Does it mean a rabbi with authority, or does it mean a person who's giving you good advice? And the Rebbe there said that everybody's capable of being a mashpia. It doesn't mean you have to be 1 to 1,000 people. Maybe you have one person that trusts you, and then you're their mashpia, and that's it. It's not about it. And he asked everyone to basically recruit yourself, mobilize, and be there for another person, because you never know who you may be helping. And obviously some people will excel. The Rebbe said it's not a lifetime contract. If you turn out to be good, great. If not, b'mechila, as they say, with all due respect, you don't have to continue doing this. So I spoke about that, how we have to reach out because we never know where Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, leads. And you never know, someone in need, you may be the person that helps them. So here's what happened. I shared that. A few weeks later, I get a phone call from a woman in the community, and no name, so I wasn't interested in her name, but she tells me the following. She says, I'm a landlord, I live on the street in Crown Heights, and sadly, our tenants that live downstairs are always arguing. And unfortunately, we try to close the doors, and it's so loud that we can't drown it out. And I try to ignore it, but it doesn't help. And I always think to myself, it's not my business, and it's not I'm just a landlord. But I heard you speak that we always have to be reaching out. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to wait one day when the woman, the tenant downstairs, the wife, is walking outside, and I'm going to go over and speak to her heart to heart, woman to woman. I went over to her, and it was very difficult for me, but I said to her, I want to apologize that if I'm crossing any lines here, boundaries, please, I'll never talk to you about this again, but I really hear the chaos going on in your home, and I just want to tell you, I want to share that if I can do anything to help, if you want to have a sympathetic ear. And the woman broke down crying, she tells me, and began to share. She says, you can't imagine what you did for me. Because anyone I speak to, they poo-poo it, they ignore me, and they dismiss me. And this woman literally saved the marriage, simply because she cared, and I shared what I heard from the Rebbe. So the idea of a mashpia, I realized right there and then, as much as I appreciated it, I didn't appreciate it until I heard this story. Care. And care does not mean you don't have to be a professional therapist to care. We all have to care. You never know who is in your proximity, whether it's a child crying, whether it's an adult crying, whether it's a man or a woman, and who you can ultimately help. So I think if you think of it in that broader term, that's really the ultimate. Long before therapy existed, there was an Avram Avinu and a Sarah. They weren't called therapists, but they happened to affect thousands, and by now millions, if not billions of people. And affect means caring, loving, not thinking only about yourself, that we're here to warm and to illuminate everyone around us. And I think that's the broadest sense of what a mashpia is. Now, in that itself, there are many levels. There's the level of, like, Selech Harav would be an authority that you listen to. There's Knei Lechachaver, you acquire a friend. A friend is not an authority, but a friend can care and also give you good advice. Doesn't have to be authoritative. And then there's the professionals. And I think you can have more than one, obviously. And all of us can only grow when we have this type of influences in our lives. And that's my general take on this mashpia thing.
You've got another question. Why is it that after I went through a trauma, I learned Chassidus, but it never helped me? Why is it that maybe at the moment whilst I was learning it, it helped, but the moment I was finished learning, my ugly feelings came back?
Okay. Well, I think we got to define what Chassidus is. I was going to throw this in earlier, but I'm glad this question came up because in addition to everything that was said at this panel, and very valuable information, of course, there's always more, but I do think, and this is not a disagreement with suggesting that instead of therapy, go learn Torah, or instead of medication, to do a mitzvah, but I think there is some tremendous value in studying Torah, and especially Chassidus, for the mental and spiritual and emotional, psychological health of a human being. But if you learn it properly. If you learn Torah in an academic way, it definitely refines your mind and you connect to God in some way. But if you learn Torah in an emotional way, which means it's personally relevant, it actually is like oxygen for the soul. True study of Chassidus is oxygen for the soul. Now, does that replace, will that solve and heal bipolar and schizophrenia and other personality disorders? No. But it definitely can help, just like therapy can help in addition to medication. Because you're feeding your soul, and feeding the soul is the single greatest preemptive medicine possible for almost all issues. But not alone, it may need support and so on. Unfortunately, in our yeshiva system, And we're not really taught how to learn Torah, and especially Chassidus, in a way that feeds your soul. We learn academic ideas. We don't see how is this empowering me. But at the end of the day, and this is of course not the place to go into the whole elaboration, Chassidic thought, which of course comes straight from the Kabbalistic thought, which goes right back to the Torah, is really studying the DNA and the building blocks of the psyche, of the soul. So for instance, when you do tzedakah and you give charity, you're not just doing the right thing by helping others, you're actually feeding and exercising the muscle in your heart called love. When you exercise restraint, you're feeding and nourishing and sustaining another attribute and of our emotional spectrum, which is called gvura. When we're compassionate, we do the same. So in other words, when you start studying Chassidus, what you realize is you're actually, just like a body needs exercise and hygiene and good diet and good behavior, same thing is with the soul. The soul, there are behaviors that actually make your soul stronger and also avoid the negative things that can pollute our souls. So there's no question that Chassidus has that power. I mean, this really requires a revolution in our own systems, and I think if it was done, it could be unbelievable change, but not just in the Jewish world, but in the entire world, being able to present these ideas, because this is actually the reason we were created. God gave us a blueprint for life, and I always think of it this way. If life is like the machine, and the Torah is the operator's manual, who built this machine called the human being? God. And God gave us an operator's manual that tells you how to make this machine work well and what to avoid, not to destroy this machine. That's really what it comes down to. So the more we understand it, the healthier we will be. The fact that it may not affect someone can be twofold, and I'll conclude with this. And that is, one, that could be because you're not studying it the right way. Number two, you may be studying it the right way, but remember, we also have plenty of blocks and plenty of impediments, including our own short, myopic vision interests. And the fact of the matter, when a person has what's called a taiva, an indulgence, something seducing your senses, then all the great ideas and the deeper spiritual ideas go on the wayside, and we all behave very foolishly. But that's also part of the process, and I think this requires really a much more discussion of how. But that's my overview of that topic.
Moshe, I'm going to move on unless you have something critical to add here. I'm going to move on. Ms. Handelsman. My older brother developed schizophrenia as a young adult teenager. At that time, there wasn't much awareness, and so my parents didn't recognize the symptoms until several years later, as he was in yeshiva overseas. I now am a mother of young children, Baruch Hashem. My mother keeps warning me to give my children vitamins, specifically which will help the brain. She worries for my children that they shouldn't develop, God forbid, any mental, emotional illness. Now I am worried too, because I cannot always get my children to take the vitamins. My questions are as follows. What is the likelihood of my children developing chas v'sholem mental illness? Have there been studies proven that these illnesses run in families? Is there any preventive measure that can be taken, such as my mother suggests, like vitamins, which help the brain?
Okay, so this is a very, very loaded question, so I'm not going to answer the whole thing in detail. I think it's like a very personal question, almost one that I encourage whoever asked it really find someone skilled to answer. But what I could say is, first of all, the idea that, the genetic component is, while it's studied, it's not a fact that everyone will, that the uncle of, this kid is, it's pretty, not that it's pretty far, it's not necessarily that it can't, but it's a possibility within a family, but it's not a fact, and it's not proven to be fully, exact. That's one thing that I would say, that for whoever is asking this, it's to calm that part of her down and say, it's not for sure. Your children are not for sure going to become schizophrenic. Another thing about the vitamins, I'm not even going to comment because I don't know much about, that kind of medical, intervention. But I guess what I would say, just because I want to answer this person that's asking, is that there's always the balance between, I know that this exists in my family, and I have children that are young and developing, and I don't want to project my own fears of what I saw with my brother, with my brother, onto my children that are, little kids and developing. I think that's like the key here, to really be very, very aware that developing children, it's very sensitive. So if we're going to start projecting our fears on them, it can really lead us to very bad places. So that's another point. If we know that there's something in our family, then it's good to know what the early warning signs would look like. But even in this case, I was like, should I even say this? Because then it's going to become obsessive, like, oh, is he developing warning signs? I would say warning signs in the back of your mind, that they're there, that in case it's really affecting, like we talked about, impacting their functioning, their school life, their friends, their family, their ability to interact with people. If it's really impacting their life, then go to a proper diagnostician.
I'm going to pick it up at this point. I think there are very clear preventive mental health guidelines, and it doesn't really involve vitamins. There may be a disorder of folic acid metabolism that might respond to vitamins, but we'll leave that one aside. And those are specific vitamins, and that's a specific genetic disorder. But I think there is something called a healthy lifestyle. And a healthy lifestyle works for mental illness as well. And a healthy lifestyle is Seder. A healthy lifestyle is communication, encourage communication within the family. A healthy lifestyle is exercise. And all of these things perhaps are much more important than vitamins in terms of prevention of mental health problems. There will still be mental health problems even in the healthiest of lifestyles, but I think we have an obligation to encourage healthy lifestyles. Last question.
Take back exercise.
Go ahead.
I'm just not comfortable with that one.
You're not comfortable with
As part of
that?
being part of like a healthy lifestyle. I feel much better if you took that back.
Okay. I don't know how to answer that. Actually, the one thing that's been proven pretty much in every area, to be helpful is exercise. For the audience out there, Alzheimer's disease, Hashem should protect us all from it. Physical exercise for the patients with Alzheimer's disease seems to be much more important than all of the lousy, expensive drugs that we're using that do nothing.
Is there a fear of getting addicted to exercise?
Yes, there is a fear of getting addicted to
That's
exercise.
my fear, yes. I won't even start or experiment.
Right. Rabbi Jacobsen, I think you get the final question. After a long time of watching bad habits exhibited by my daughter, we learned that she was abused, unfortunately. She is, Baruch Hashem, doing better now in all ways except spiritually. She now says that she's not interested in being Jewish. Of course, I want her to get better, and I don't believe I should switch her non-Jewish therapist since emotionally she is slowly improving. But is there a way to speak with her therapist about embracing her religion, instead of the therapist encouraging her to take on any religion she wants? And B, I've heard those that have been abused sometimes abuse. Do we need to keep her away from my grandchildren? Two very, very disparate questions here. Go ahead.
Okay, well, very often people are abused, unfortunately, tragically, especially if they're abused by in religious environments or even by religious authorities. Essentially, their religion gets taxified by it. And because their experience of religion is nothing beautiful, it's just it's just abusive. So I think you have to take great care, as much as the parents have good intentions of trying to keep their daughter more religious and thinking that it may help her. For her religion may be part of the abuse. And sometimes you have to lose God before you find God. I know this may be controversial for some, but this is a fact. And unfortunately, it's like a snowball thing. There may be beautiful things about religion, but I know quite a few people who are abused on Shabbos, and they can't keep Shabbos anymore. Because for Shabbos, them Shabbos is no longer Shabbos. Shabbos was the day when they were abused. So you have to be sensitive to this. And from a Torah religious point of view, the relationship to God is a relationship with God, not with toxic rituals that have been unfortunately corrupted. So we all understand that Shabbos is not to blame, and that Shabbos could help people, but for this person, Shabbos right now is part of the problem. And if you're not sensitive to that, you could end up causing even more damage, because it's like almost like supporting the abuser. And so I would advise to the parents that are asking this question that they should not make decisions on their own, because they may have good intentions and they may be very committed to God and they want their child to be a God-fearing Jew, keeping Torah mitzvah, but they need to speak to a professional. And even someone that's Jewish, they can speak to people who are devout. I'm not saying they have to go to a secular person who may be anti-religious or neutral about it, because even from a Torah point of view, this is a mistake that many religious people think. They think if you just keep doing religion, it's going to solve all the problems. It's not correct at all, especially if the religion is associated with the abuse. So that's one thing. I would suggest show profound love for your daughter, unconditional love. It should not be tied with any strings attached to their Judaism. Leave them alone, leave the child alone. I don't know how old the girl is, but whatever the age is. Do not try to impose, not Shabbos, not other mitzvahs. Love, 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 period. Everything else will follow. And I know this may sound strange coming from a rabbi, because this would sound like more like someone coming from a secular therapeutic environment, but I say without unequivocal, and it's just really, just give a basis in case some of you may wonder where I got this from the Torah. The Torah says sometimes you have to be mechal one Shabbos, transgress Shabbos in order to be able to keep many Shabboses. Now, of course, that's used for pekuach nefesh purposes. In other words, if a person is not healthy, they have to transgress Shabbos. It's not transgressing Shabbos, it's keeping Shabbos, because Torah was given to live by. But it could also be used in a psychological sense. Another thing I would say is when the Jews came out of Egypt and they asked God, give us your mitzvahs, you know what God said? First accept me, and then I know you'll accept my mitzvahs. The mitzvahs of the Torah are meant to have a relationship with God. They're not an end in themselves. So the key for any person to heal, use the word connection time and again, is to connect to God. And you connect to God on your terms. If for this person Shabbos or other Jewish things are simply not working or actually are turnoffs, then you have to find other ways for them to connect to God. And Avos Yisrael happens to be, by the way, the biggest mitzvah of all, and especially from parents to children. So I say it very unequivocally, without even hesitation. There's no qualification to this point. You have to show complete love. That child is rejecting Judaism. There's a reason, and that reason is probably connected to the abuse. It's not because they suddenly woke up one day and say, "I don't like Torah." And now you need to find therapists that are sensitive to this, who are not anti-religious, but also understand that religion is not going to be. You can't use it as a stick, and you can't use it as a tool. You have to first help the person heal, and then they will re-embrace God and Torah in their own way at the right time. That's the brief answer.